And so welcome everybody to the STRIDE webinar that we are presenting today. I am Sherrilene Classen. I am a professor in the Great Department of Occupational Therapy, and I'm a chair of this department. And with me, I have got one of our really young, upcoming, brilliant scientists, Dr. Justin Mason, who is co-presenting with me this afternoon. And so this is a team effort, and so we will continue to tag team as we go through this particular presentation. So we are really excited to talk about this demonstration study that was a collaboration between the University of Florida's Institute for Mobility, Activity and Participation and UAB's Trend Lab. And from the get-go, we want to acknowledge Dr. Virginia Sisiopiku, who is one of our excellent collaborators and really a team player in this particular project. So she is joining us in Zoom, but for the purposes of smoothness, we decided that we will keep the presenters to 2 this afternoon. So welcome everybody, and thank you for being with us. So as I mentioned, this is a STRIDE funded project, and as you can see that the STRIDE Center is a 2016 United States Department of Transportation funded region, and we are affiliated under Region 4 of the other UCTs. So just to give a little bit of context. I do want to acknowledge our project team. This work is really an end product of team science. And so some of the main players, their names are there under the project team. And also I want to really acknowledge our stakeholders, which of course is TransDev that provided the EZ10 shuttle, the City of Gainesville, Oak Hammock Residential Community, the Rotary Clubs of Gainesville, the UF Transportation Institute, our Department of Transportation in Florida, as well as the Florida Safe Mobility for Life Coalition. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the folks who really provided a lot of support to make this study happen. So we are going to go through a standard scientific presentation this afternoon. So we're going to provide you some background. We're going to talk about our objectives as well as our methods, results. We'll give you a summary of important take-home messages, talk a little bit about the impact that our study have, and then some of the next steps that we are in the process of executing actually already. And as you can see there on the screen, that's our beautiful little EZ10 or the Easy Mile shuttle that TransDev is operating right here in downtown Gainesville. So a little bit of background on the study. So older adults make up at least, on average, about 20% of the United States population. And we do know from epidemiological and trend data that driving is still the preferred mode of transportation. But we also know that there's risk involved with driving, and that driving cessation, on the other hand, is not necessarily a solution to keep folks who may be at higher risk on the road off the road, because driving cessation is linked to depression, it's linked to social isolation, early nursing home admissions, and we also know from epidemiological studies linked to premature death. So we do think that autonomous vehicles might hold health and safety benefits for older adults, especially if they accept and adopt them. Those are the prerequisites. And there are some literature that's emerging in the field. So the extant literature are showing that they are looking at older adults' perceptions pertaining to their use of autonomous vehicles and autonomous shuttles. But most of these studies have been done by survey only, and not necessarily after folks have been exposed to either a autonomous vehicle or an autonomous shuttle. And so our team expected that user perceptions will change after being exposed to autonomous vehicle technology. And so especially at the level 4, using the Society of Automotive Engineers classification. And that is really just for folks that's unsure, that is really where a vehicle is in highly automated mode, but it is operating within a geo-fenced area, meaning that it will do all of the smart maneuvers when it's running within that area with the smart centers, but outside that area, it will not be able to run in automated mode. So So our objectives for this particular study was to develop and validate an autonomous vehicle user perception survey so that we could in a more targeted way, address the needs and the perceptions and the beliefs and the knowledge of the older adults. And then secondly, also to obtain and analyze information on the perceptions of the older drivers about the technology before and after driving a simulator that was running in level 4 automated mode, as well as riding in the autonomous shuttle. So we do have the interim analysis of our first study that we published that was published in Frontiers, and you can actually obtain that study by clicking on the DOI as indicated on the slide. Right, so for our methods, we had IRB 01 full board approval to conduct the study, and our design was twofold. First, we used measurement theory to be able to look to develop and to test the autonomous vehicle user perception survey. And so we did a full psychometric evaluation, and we'll talk more about that today. And we also used a repeated measures crossover design to be able to look at the pre-post exposure of the older adults in both of the modes, the autonomous shuttle as well as the autonomous driving simulator. We had 104 participants completed the study of 106 that we targeted. And the inclusion criteria was that they could have been 65 years of age or older, and they needed to have a valid driver's license. Our exclusion criterion pertained to their cognitive level of functioning, and we excluded those participants who had moderate to severe cognitive decline as operationalized on the Montreal Cognitive Assessments score of less than 18. And then we used the two sets of equipment, as I've already alluded to. On the top right-hand corner, you can see we've got the RTI High Fidelity Driving Simulator. And we'll say a little bit more about the features of the simulator in a second, but it is important to know that each one of our participants went through an acclimation drive, that we followed simulator sickness protocol, and then that they drove a suburban scenario that was modeled after the suburban area in Gainesville, Florida, that the shuttle was supposed to drive. More of that to come in a second. And then we also showed you the picture of the Transdev Easy Mile on the bottom right-hand corner, and then we'll say a little bit more about the route. So the participants were, after their baseline exposure, randomly allocated to two conditions. But before we get there, for baseline exposure, as you can see, we did a lot of baseline measures. The only two that we are going to spend more time on today is basically the demographics as well as the AV user perception survey, as indicated in red font over there. So the participants were randomly allocated to either be exposed to the simulator first or the shuttle first. And then after their exposures and within a short time frame, we actually exposed them to the other modality. So pertaining to visit 2 and 3, again, we're going to focus on the motion sickness questionnaire, which is a questionnaire developed by Janelle Brooks at Clemson University, and it's derived from the Kennedy more extensive simulator sickness questionnaire, but it's got great clinical utility for us, and we use this particular questionnaire to look at motion sickness in the shuttle as well as simulator sickness in the driving simulator. And we'll show that data to you today. So, so that's the data that we're going to focus on. If you are interested in more information, we can certainly send you our manuscripts. So just a few words on our shuttle route. So this is the downtown Gainesville, Florida area. And so essentially this shuttle ride started in a parking garage, and then it veered into a east direction on a street, as you can see. So it was one straight drive. At the end of this particular drive, it negotiated a traffic circle and then went all the way west back to the parking garage. The entire route took about 12 minutes to complete. And so the road dynamics was that this route included intersections as well as pedestrian crosswalks. And as I mentioned, roundabouts, but there were also other dynamics such as cyclists, there were pedestrians and scooters because this was in the downtown area and there were students, student traffic. Interesting, there's also construction of a new building on the westbound area. And then we had to deal with solar glare in the morning as well as in the afternoon. And buses were also using this particular route. So a lot of traffic dynamics on this particular route. And so we were really excited about this, and everything, of course, worked great until it didn't anymore. And so this is when the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration decided not to issue waivers for collecting data on public roads. And so we still wanted to continue with the study, so we had to resort to Plan B, which is by now kind of like a given in any research study is to have a good Plan B. And we actually collected the data in a deserted bus depot. And you can see that this particular route was very benign. There's no traffic, there's no pedestrians, there's no cyclists. And it was essentially just a test drive with the shuttle that went from point 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and to 5. And so we fully realized from the get-go that this is a limitation of our study, that we could not do it in the downtown Gainesville area. And then, of course, to complicate things a little bit more, we dealt with the pandemic and the effects of COVID-19. And so we really could not have participants in the shuttle, to the extent that we wanted it. So we had one participant with the safety operator in the actual shuttle. So some of the dynamics that influenced our study, and we'll talk more about this. This is just to give you an orientation of the seats that's available, as well as the standing seats. And as I mentioned, we utilized one of those seats as well as the safety operator who took a standing seat. The data were collected at the Smart House, which is located in a residential area in Oak Hammock in Gainesville. And particularly, that's also where our RTI high fidelity simulator is housed. And this particular simulator has got 7 high definition channels, creating a 180-degree field of view. And so if you look at that, there's 3 forward projectors there's 2 side view mirrors, there's 1 rear view mirror, and then there's also a virtual display that helps us to understand what is going on in the vehicle. The refresh rate, for those of you that's interested in this, is 60 hertz. And it's being done with high intensity projectors to be able to reduce any discomfort that folks may experience. As I've already mentioned, we've administered the simulator sickness questionnaire before and after the acclimation scenario, and then after the main drive. And the main drive basically consisted out of all of the geographic features that I have already shared with you in downtown Gainesville. And if you are interested to look at our drive, we have included the YouTube video link for you at the bottom of this slide, where the entire drive is recorded. And we'll be more than happy to send that to you in a follow-up email as well. And our Stride moderator, Ms. Odine Wells, will help us to coordinate that. Right, so in terms of the method, so we collected the data in these 2 sites, with the 2 modes of autonomous vehicles, and it's been done by a trained research assistant. All the data were entered into our data management and capture software, which is the RedCap system, and this is a system that's IRB approved by the University of Florida. As I've already mentioned, we targeted 106 participants, but we actually enrolled 104 in our study. The analysis was quite extensive, and so just to summarize, we've used R Studios and R version 4.0.2, and Dr. Mason will talk more about that in a second. We determined the psychometrics of the Autonomous Vehicle User Perception Survey via face validity, content validity, as well as construct validity, and we also did retest reliability. Of course, we had summary statistics to be able to understand our nuances of our population, and the simulator sickness differences were determined via the Wilcoxon signed rank test. For our crossover design, We used a two-way mixed ANOVA, and we used 10 variables of the 28 variables in the Autonomous Vehicle User Perception Survey. And the reason for that is each one of these variables represented a domain of this particular survey, and also some of these variables showed to be significant in our interim analysis. And you can see that we looked at the ANOVA in terms of time, group, and time by group interaction. And because of the multiple comparisons, we actually used the Benjamini-Hochberg procedure to control for multiple comparisons. So I am going to now turn it over to Dr. Mason to talk about the face and content validity of the user perception survey. Dr. Mason.
Thank you, Dr. Classen. So this is actually where my postdoc began, and that was under the mentorship of Dr. Classen. And I'd like to acknowledge the funding from STRIDE that allowed me to start as a postdoc. And that would be starting in August 2018, we started putting together items, going through the literature, making sure we were including relevant surveys that have been constructed, that have been published, or that were in the process of publication. So we scoured through dissertations, through reports, through published work, through unpublished work, to then build a conceptual model of what we wanted to get at, which would be the acceptance and adoption of autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles. So we wanted to include these factors, and that would be safety, trust, a few external variables, which I will discuss in a second, as well as control of the vehicle, prior experience with technology, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and then intention to use. So here are a few of the models. There definitely was more literature that we pulled from, but we utilized items from the technology acceptance model, safety critical technology acceptance model, and several other variations of the TAM, as well as the self-driving car acceptance scale and the 4P acceptance model. So we started with looking and assessing the face validity, which really is just how clear are the items? Are they understandable? Do they make sense to the respondent? And then does it look like it's going to assess what we want it to assess? So we pulled 40 items or generated, and we also generated items to have an item pool of 40. After going through face validity, we were down to 39 items. There were about 9 items that were revised during this process. And this was when we met with several stakeholders and experts to then provide us feedback on item clarity and concision and whatnot. After that, we then assessed content validity through 7 subject matter experts. A few are likely on this call now, and we'd like to thank them for their participation and contributions to creating this scale. It took 2 rounds of edits to get down to 32 items. Several of these items were revised. As you can see, roughly 7 items were removed. And then again, there were a lot of changes that occurred throughout the 2 rounds to get us a survey that we could then go through further psychometric testing. So there's just a breakdown on the table in the bottom right, looking at the items and how they load into those dimensions, which were previously mentioned. The external variables included cost, social influence, media, and authority. Next up, we decided to add a little bit more rigor, and we utilized the baseline responses from this project, which were 104 responses. We collected an additional 208 responses through Amazon Mechanical Turk, better known as MTurk, really just a crowdsourcing platform to get responses from demographics that we'd like to inquire or responses that we'd like to get from a certain population. So we first looked at the retest reliability after a 2-week break. We basically sent those participants that completed the survey on MTurk, we sent them a email 2 weeks later. We asked them to complete the survey again, and then they were compensated if they were to complete the survey. So there were 84 participants that completed the survey for a second round. And as you can see, there was a strong association, excellent retest reliability, and excellent internal consistency while assessing or looking at the retest reliability. Additionally, we then started to look at the construct validity, which began with a classic technique known as the exploratory factor analysis. This indicated that 26 out of 28 of the items, there's only 28 of the items that were scaled on a VAS scale, which is basically a 0 to 100 visual analog scale. And there were 4 that were open-ended and weren't added to that validation process just because they had a different response. So the 28 items that went through the EFA, 26 of them represented 4 different factors. And I'll go through that in 1 second. 2 of the items loaded on 1 factor, which we termed or named as experience with technology. And given that it was only 2 items to represent the factor, we didn't put that through our Moken scale analysis. So Moken scale analysis would be an alternative approach to a confirmatory factor analysis. It's more similar to a Gutman scaling, which also aligns with rash analysis as well. There's a few subtle differences, but it's similar to rash analysis. So the factors, the 3 factors of the 4 were entered into the Moken scales to see if they were valid scales and if they did, if the items did load properly. And then we also entered all 28 items into the Moken scaling analysis separately to then see if it were a unidimensional or a total score that we could create. So there was a total score, it's a total acceptance score, which would be 20 of the 28 items. And then there were 3 separate Moken scales, which can be used on their own or combined with one another. But that gives a little bit more versatility in the field if maybe you're concerned about respondent burden or participant burden. So you could use 4 items and assess their well-being. You could use 6 items and assess perceived barriers, or 13 items and measure their intention to use automated vehicles. So the Moken scale analysis resulted in a refined 28-item AVUPS, the Automated Vehicle User Perception Survey, that would contain 24 VAS items, visual analog scale items, and 4 open-ended items. And the publication is below, explaining in more detail the construct validity and test-retest reliability. And all of these, I believe, except the most recent publication, were published with Frontiers. So they're all open access, which is very nice, and that helps get rid of that barrier. So here is just a massive table, which may seem confusing, but I'll break it down very quickly. You don't need to be concerned with the H values, which are under step 1 in the column, which would be right here, as well as right here. So the first subscale was the intention to use. You can see which items loaded on this scale. And then after that, the second scale, the second Moken scale, which would be assessing perceived barriers, is located right there. As you can see, 1 item weakly loaded, but then was removed, and that would be item number 3. And then well-being as well, and all 4 items loaded onto well-being. The 2 items were not entered because there were only 2 items for experience with technology. Therefore, we didn't run that through Moken scaling analysis because 3 or more items was required. And then 2 items did not scale on the bottom left. And then as mentioned, all 28 items were entered, and then 20 of those loaded onto the total score. The image on the right looks at the test-retest reliability. So you can see the difference score after 2 weeks. Quite a few of these respondents had a different score anywhere around plus or minus 2. As you can see, it kind of follows that middle line, slight changes occurring after 2 weeks, which is really good to see with a psychological assessment such as this. But if you look at the confidence interval, which is 95%, 95% of the respondents fell within about plus 14 or minus 12, meaning that their score either decreased by 12 or increased by 14 or somewhere within that region. And that would be for the 84 participants that did complete the test-retest. And I will hand it back over to Dr. Classen.
So lots of work that went into, of course, the validation of the scale and making sure that we have believable psychometrics that can be operationalized as valid as well as reliable. So I'm going to give you some demographic information on our participants. From the 104 who attended our study or participated in our study, you can see that the sex distribution is 47 men and 57 women. And then in terms of the racial distribution, we did have some diversity, and the breakdown is very consistent for a college town here in Gainesville, Florida, which is basically 93 of the participants were of the Caucasian race, and then we had 7 who self-identified as Black. We had 1 Asian or Pacific Islander, and then some other. So yeah, this is very consistent with the census data for Gainesville, but of course, not representative of the state of Florida or any of the other states, and we are fully aware of that. In terms of the mean age of our participants, slide that down. The mean age of our participants was 74, thank you, yeah, was 74.29, and the standard deviation was 5.96. And we had folks enrolled in the study from 65 to 91 years of age. Interestingly, our educational status of the participants showed that 72% of them had either a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate degree, which again, of course, is an outlier. There's also 14 of the participants who had high school diploma or a GED, 12 of them who had an associate's degree, and 2 of them who completed technical school. So by no means a group of folks where we can generalize information. I also want to talk just briefly about the results of the simulator and motion sickness. Now remember, the simulator sickness data we obtained from the driving simulator and the motion sickness data from the autonomous shuttle. So on the left-hand side, what you can see are basically the domains of the motion sickness assessment questionnaire. And these 4 domains are sweatiness, queasiness, dizziness, and nauseousness. And participants self-reported, and so it was self-perceived sweatiness, for example, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the worst outcome. And so, as already mentioned, we've used the Wilcoxon signed rank test, and we looked at the positive ranks. So across the 4 domains, we saw that there were statistical significant differences as indicated by the p-values over there. And if we broke it down, we would see that in the simulator, there were 19 participants who reported sweatiness and only 3 participants in the shuttle, 32 participants squeeziness, 0 in the shuttle, 27 participants dizziness, 1 in the shuttle, and 18 participants nauseousness, 0 in the shuttle. So hence the statistical significant differences. So our take-home message here is that simulator sickness still occurs when participants are being exposed to a driving simulator, despite the fact that we've used simulator sickness protocol, which was very rigorous. However, we also need to make sure that we don't just look at the ranks or the number of participants. We also need to make sure that we mention that not one participant got, so sick that they felt that they couldn't continue with the study, and we had a 0 attrition rate based on, we attributed this to our simulator sickness protocol. So that's great that all participants could complete the drive. Again, I'm going to give this over to Dr. Mason to talk us through the results of our repeated measures design and the ANOVA that we use to look at group differences between those who were exposed to the shuttle versus the simulator. And you're going to talk about the time as well as the group effects.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Classen. So I'll begin by looking at the time effect from our ANOVA, our 2-way ANOVA. So this really just displays at the bottom, you can see baseline values, and these are scored from 0 to 100. So the blue line would be trust, as you can see over here. Red line would be media, and then green line would be perception of control or driving efficacy. So the blue indication here would be the post-hoc, which was the BH or the Benjamin E. Hochberg procedure. And that's just signifying that there was a effect if comparing baseline to exposure. So trust did increase. And then, as you can see here, it also maintained after their second exposure. So this is just time. Everyone is essentially grouped together. Exposure 1 could be either the shuttle or the simulator, and they're just collapsed together. So as you can see, trust did increase compared to baseline at exposure 1, and that held at exposure 2, whereas perceptions of how much the media could influence their view on automated vehicles, it increased from 58 to 63 at exposure 1, but then it went back to pretty close to baseline. No significant difference here for exposure 2.
We also just need to note that all of the increases indicate that the perceptions or the knowledge or the belief increased in a positive direction, meaning that folks were more accepting of the technology.
Correct. Good, good addition. That is, some of these items were reverse scored to then reflect a positive manner. And basically, there's also increases that occurred, meaning that the cost had an influence on their perceptions of automated vehicles, and they were more likely to want to purchase an automated vehicle after experiencing it once, and that maintained throughout to exposure 2 as signified by the green stars above. There were no differences in intention to use, at least they were not significantly different when looking at the time effect, and neither was the social influence that it would have on their perceptions of automated vehicles. And then the last table here, or the last graph here, perceived usefulness increased from baseline at exposure 1 and exposure 2, and that can be signified above, as well as their perceptions of safety. So after both exposures, they believed, or they signified that that older drivers felt safe in automated vehicles in our specific scenarios or on road route. Whereas authority did not change, and perceived ease of use also did not change. So this is just the group effect, and as you can see, none of the p-values reach anywhere near significant, meaning that there were no group differences observed. And then last but not least, here were some of the time by group interactions, which is a bit more important than time and group effects. The results I'd like to highlight would be the perceptions of trust increased, as previously mentioned, and we saw that with the interaction. So we saw trust was increased both in group 1 and in group 2 at their first and second exposure, which were different. It was either the simulator first or the shuttle first for group 2. And that was, again, compared to their baseline perceptions or their trust in automated vehicles. This was also true for group 1 and their perceived usefulness. So perceived usefulness increased for group 1. They were a group that experienced the simulator and then the shuttle. Whereas the second group had to experience the simulator to then have increases in perceived usefulness. And then last but not least, safety also increased compared to baseline for both groups, and that occurred whether they were exposed to the simulator or the shuttle, and clearly the order did not matter or did not have a large influence. And now I'll hand off the summary to Dr. Classen to take us home.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mason. That was a lot of information. So we encourage you to think about asking questions in the chat if you want us to go in more detail or deeper explanation pertaining to the findings, because we do recognize that this is a complex analysis and quite a few analyses that we employ to get the results of the study. So please feel free to ask us in the chat if you need further clarification or explanation. We'd be happy to answer that. Okay, in terms of the summary, so obviously, our study had limitations, and I've already alluded to a few of them. So we had spectrum bias in our study because of the mainly Caucasian and highly educated group of people that involved in our study. We also had evidence of selection bias. So Florida is a very transient community, and much of the data that we collected actually occurred throughout the summer months. And we do know that in the summer months, the older adults are traveling, especially due to the snowbird phenomena. So we do know that there were self-selection bias in the study, and especially because we had a convenient sample. Sampling bias, therefore, was evident in our study. And we unfortunately had to deal with this issue about incongruence in the route between the simulator and the shuttle. And that's despite the fact that we put a lot of effort in making sure that there is congruence between the simulator route and the shuttle route. But we cannot tell the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration what to do, and nor could we prevent the pandemic. So we had to resort to, like I mentioned, plan B and C, and acknowledge this as a huge limitation in our study. And then, of course, all of these limitations could have led to an over or underestimation of the participants' experience. And so we do know that the estimates of our study may be over or underestimated as a result of these factors. We do want to point out that the study had what we perceived as quite a few strengths. First of all, we utilized a survey with good to excellent validity and reliability, and that was basically developed for this particular study So we did not utilize, for example, the more general surveys that's been used or that has been used up until now. So we also captured the perceptions of 104 older adults who were randomly allocated, and that of course provided some internal validity to our findings to the two modes of automation for a pre-post exposure comparison of their perceptions. And this is a reasonable sample to be able to at least identify trends and patterns within the realm of the limitations. The simulator, we think, can serve as a reasonable mode for conducting autonomous vehicle studies. And of course, as our data have shown, we do need to manage the simulator sickness in terms of the onset, but also the prevention and the mitigation of that. And so again, a thorough simulator sickness protocol that needs to be instituted the day before the participants come for testing is really important. One of the things that we ask participants not to do is not to drink, to be exposed to caffeine. That can be, coffee or caffeinated tea or any other sources of caffeine. We ask them to be on a bland diet and not to engage in fat or rich, fatty food or rich food. And then the morning of, we try to make sure that we have quite a few strategies in place, and I can talk more about that, including having ginger ale on hand and crackers on hand and having the simulator lab set up in such a way that we do not aggravate the onset of simulator sickness. And again, I'll be happy to talk in more detail about that. And then finally, this study will not have been able to be completed if we didn't have the involvement of a variety of experts. As Dr. Mason recognized some people on this in the Zoom room today, our many collaborators, as well as the composition of the team. We worked with people who had experience in autonomous shuttles. So we had industry partners, we had the City of Gainesville as a partner, we had the Transportation Research Institute as a partner. So really the interest and the support of a lot of team members. And then in conclusion, we do think that the take-home message for this study is that if we expose older adults to autonomous vehicle technology, and particularly these two modes that we've explained, that it can promote their acceptance and adoption practices, particularly pertaining to safety, to trust, and to their willingness to use the driving simulator, as Dr. Mason has highlighted in the findings of this study. So in terms of the impact of our study, well, we have a validated and reliable autonomous vehicle user perception survey that we hope that you will use and that you will also share with your colleagues and let us know how your data are playing out and what refinement needs to be done to this particular survey. We also hope that our data informed transportation researchers and the city planners. We do know that we've already made recommendations to the autonomous vehicle industry partners in a variety of occasions. For example, one of the things that the shuttle didn't have was a belting down procedure to belt wheelchair users down in the shuttle. And so on the fly, we actually made those recommendations, and very fortunate that our industry partners actually implemented some of our suggestions. And we also know that the finding of this study will have benefits for a variety of agents of aging networks, such as, for example, the AARP and our partners in some of our professional organizations. As we are helping them to understand how older adults' perceptions change positively in at least some of the dimensions after exposure to the autonomous shuttle. I think it's really important to listen to what the previous Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, said when she said that consumer acceptance will be the constraint to the growth of the autonomous vehicle industry. So it's incredibly important that we need to work with consumers to help them to accept and finally adopt this technology. So our study started to help us understand the ease of use practices. And we now know that people need to feel safe, as well as that they need to feel that they are trusting the technology. We also started identifying opportunities to overcome the barriers to improve their acceptance of autonomous vehicles. And then, finally, the older drivers' acceptance practices of these technologies are really important for us, and knowing that after exposure that they were more likely to accept the technologies than prior to exposure when we rely only on survey data. So we think that these findings can help us to move forward on a positive trajectory towards acceptance and adoption practices of autonomous vehicle technologies. Our next steps is we would like to continue with psychometric testing for the autonomous vehicle user perception survey, specifically looking at criterion validity. And so we would actually look at folks who accepted and adopted the technology, and then perhaps do some studies with them to understand more about the criterion validity of our measure. We also are in the process of doing a robust analysis of the qualitative feedback of this particular study. As Dr. Mason mentioned, there were 4 open-ended questions where folks could give us any kind of thoughts or ideas that they wanted to about their experience in the shuttle or the simulator, and we're busy analyzing that. We received funding last year to continue with a phase 2 study, and in this particular study, we are including younger and middle-aged drivers. And we'll give a shout out to our PhD student, Sangwoo Hangbu, who is doing an amazing job in recruiting and enrolling participants in this study, as well as some of our other team members that's helping him in this endeavor. And we've just recently received a phase 2 extension study where we are going to look at the perceptions of adults with disabilities. So we hope that at the end of these studies that we will have at least data of about 250 people, so that we can use a life span approach to be able to look at the differences among different age cohorts, as well as between those who are able-bodied and those who are self-identifying as disabled. And in so doing, bring more information to all of you and to the advancement of science as well as clinical practice. So that concludes our study. So Dr. Mason, if you want to invite the audience for further participation.
Yeah, so we appreciate you joining us during your potential lunch time. Hopefully you're able to enjoy your food. So we'll take time, we'll give you plenty of time to provide us with questions in the chat box now. And then I believe Undine will provide a brief survey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on that survey.
Indeed. And as you are thinking about your questions or entering your questions, we also would like to just draw your attention to the upcoming STRIDE webinar that's entitled Transportation to Healthcare and COVID-19, Exploring Pandemic Era Travel Trends and Post-Pandemic Challenges and Opportunities by some of our distinguished colleagues, as highlighted there on the slide, with a nice pictorial display of their faces as well. Right, so the questions are starting to come in. So please continue with that, and we'll just try to read some of the questions and then try to answer them.
I'll start with the first question, and I'll read this out loud. Thanks for the great presentation. How did you come up with a 106 target number of participants? So I can answer that. We started with a power analysis. We took an effect size from the literature, which there wasn't much at the time, and we really just made a strong assumption for what we assumed the effect would be, and then we just wanted to be adequately powered. Our power analysis put us at 106. We used the standard protocol of 80% power and then an alpha level of 0.05. So that is detailed in our most recent publication, which was accepted yesterday to the Journal of Transportation and Health. So I believe that power analysis is in there. If not, you're more than welcome to email myself or Dr. Classen, and we can provide you with that analysis.
Okay. The next question is, can you talk more about why the team chooses to do the random allocation about the exposure order? Dr. Mason, you want to take that one as well?
Yeah, so we We didn't know. This was an exploratory study to compare exposing older adults to simulation and then to an on-road shuttle. So we weren't positive if there would be an order effect. So we wanted to utilize a very strong protocol, which would be about the gold standard of utilizing random allocation. And that was really the best approach with the amount of participants that we were able to collect. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's a reasonable explanation. Our next question is coming from one of our great colleagues out of UAB. Hello, Desi. It's Dr. Despinas Travinas that's asking, were your MTurk participants older adults? And was the measure validated on older adults? So, Dr. Mason, if you want to speak to the first part of the question, I'll take the second part of the question.
Yeah, so this actually took a lot of careful consideration because we were hoping and we expected this to be more than just phase 1. We were hoping that there would be a phase 2 and a phase 2 extension. So during validation, we decided to open up the responses to more than just older adults. And we basically just picked anyone, or we allowed anyone that was an adult. So the inclusion criteria was 18, upwards of 85 or 90. And then we ended up balancing that with the 104 participants that were older adults. So we really had a nice spread of demographics for our survey.
Good. And then the second part of the question was the measure validated on older adults. So I think you can infer from Dr. Mason's response, no. But it was also done with the intent not to validate it just on older adults because of our continued work in this particular field, looking at younger adults as well as middle-aged adults. So it is validated for the general public of drivers. Right now, we have data from between the ages of 18 to 91. So I hope that clarifies that question. And I'm sure that we will have to make some tweaks once we start looking at people with disabilities. That will be a whole different level that we will take the measure to.
I think it's also important to note that this was validated considering really level 4 or level 5 automation. So I received a few questions at, I believe, the TRB conference on if this survey should be utilized to assess perceptions of maybe like level 1, 2, or 3 automation. I'd be very hesitant to suggest that. I think that this scale could be modified or tweaked and then further validated to maybe assess different levels of automation. But I'd be very hesitant to say that you should use this to look at the lower levels of automation or perceptions thereof, lower levels of automation.
Indeed. And if anybody is interested to get a copy of the measure, we can certainly make sure that we send the link to this measure as well in our follow-up responses. Okay, the next question is, do you have any thoughts on what influenced the improvement of participants' perception of safety? So I think we'll tag team here, Dr. Mason. So I'll give my perceptions and then you can add yours. So I definitely think that folks felt secure because as we enrolled them in the study, we had an explanation of what they can expect pertaining to their experiences via informed consent. So they came in knowing what they could expect, you know, and then we had a research assistant that basically welcomed them, that exposed them to the shuttle, and of course the safety operator that is functioning right now under NHTSA's policies. These vehicles, at least the level 4 vehicles, cannot run without a safety operator on board. Also explained to the participants the operations of the vehicle and then the features of the vehicle as well. So folks were oriented prior to them being exposed to the autonomous shuttle. Likewise, in the driving simulator, you know, we expose folks to an acclimation drive in which they could basically see what happens if they don't touch the steering wheel and if their feet are not touching any of the primary controls such as the gas or the brake, and have this experience of the vehicle driving itself, which was for many people an aha experience, sitting in front of the vehicle and it drives itself. So we think that both of those real life experiences increased their perceptions in terms of safety. You want to add anything?
Yeah, obviously we think it was really important to expose older adults to this technology. You don't necessarily know what it's like if you're only reading about it or seeing tweets from Elon Musk or whatnot. So I think it's really important to experience the technology, and we did provide a very safe environment, which Dr. Classen stated. She mentioned that the simulation was very smooth and it was also validated in a separate paper, which we haven't mentioned. So we spent a lot of time making sure that our scenario was well developed and reflected the natural environment. And then again, yeah, in the shuttle, they were with an operator. The operator was able to provide a little bit more insight about the technology and was very transparent with the limitations of the shuttle right now and with what the function capacity was of the vehicle. So I think that definitely influenced their perceptions of automated vehicles.
Yep, indeed. So also just to alert you that Ms. Ondine Wells is asking, I think twice now, that you please complete the actual survey to provide feedback on our presentation today.
Make sure we went through all of them.
Okay. So we are just scrolling down to see if there are any other questions that we can manage.
It looks like we answered all of the questions that we received. We know that this video will be posted online. We'll also ask that Ondine shared some of our DOIs or our links to our articles. We've had 6 publications, 6 different papers, 2 on the AV user perception survey validation, 1 on the survey scenario, or not survey, the simulation scenario validation, an interim analysis, a final analysis, which was accepted yesterday, and then there was also a paper on the motion and simulator sickness. It's a lot to keep track of. There's been a lot of productivity occurring throughout this process.
So thank you, Dr. Mason. So I don't have any more questions. If you don't have any on your end, we can close the webinar. Okay, so we want to thank you for your attention and for spending this time with us. We are very happy to answer any remaining questions that you may have. If you want to follow up with us via email, that would be totally fine. We wish you well with your work in the area of transportation where your interest lies. And, you know, it totally takes a scientific community with many stakeholders and partners to do this important work. So we really do appreciate it. Thanks again to your attention. Thank you to Dr. Sisiopiku, who I know was online in the Zoom room, and to my co-presenter, Dr. Mason, for co-presenting with me. We wish you all a happy day, and you still have like 3 or 4 minutes left to go get a nice fresh breath of air before 1 o'clock. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.